Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Brian Mulroney Institute of Government event, 1 year in, the second Trump term in focus. We're so glad you could all make it tonight. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that today we meet in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. It remains important to remember the destructive elements of colonialism that perpetuate today, both here and in Canada and abroad. I'm always reminded of what the Honorable Sinclair Murray said, education got us into this mess and education will get us out of it. I hope I do my part to help clean up the mess. And as we come to the end of marking African Heritage Month, I'm reminded of the many academics who came before me, such as Agnes Caliste, a sociologist who did pioneering work with Black railway porters and Caribbean nurses, and Dr. Desmond Anthony, Dr. Denton Anthony's father, who is a leading international researcher in the field of parasitology. It is their work and shoulders that we stand upon. I'd also like to take a moment to say that St. FX lost a bright and kind student this week, Jonas Catch. Our thoughts are with Jonas' family and friends during this very difficult time. We met a couple of times last year to discuss the US election, the inauguration, and 100 days into Trump's presidency. Today, just 2 days after the US State of Union address, apparently the longest in history for the United States, we meet again to see where things stand. The Brian Mulroney Institute of Government is very pleased to bring this discussion to you this evening. One of the legacies of the Honorable Brian Mulroney is that he approached all discussions, political or otherwise, with dignity, decency, and decorum. At times, these qualities may seem to be in short supply, but we know these are values that are not only at the core of the Mulroney Institute's work, but are what St. FX and our community aspire to embody. You will see these values at play this evening. Today's panelists come from different backgrounds, different foci on what is top of mind, as the US is in what Donald Trump calls its golden era. Our panelists will discuss what this might mean for Americans, Canadians, and those around the globe. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nathan Allen, this evening's moderator, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Linda. Okay, my name's Nathan Allen. I'm the chair of the political science department. Tonight, I, though, am just the traffic cop and going to try to get a little bit go a bit deeper on some of the comments that we're going to hear tonight, but we have an excellent panel lined up. So what I'm going to do, I'll introduce them, and then I'll just give my notes of warning on my traffic copness. So starting over at the far end here, we have Dr. Asa McKercher. He's the Stephen K. Hudson Research Chair in Canada-U.S. Relations and a professor in Public Policy and Governance at St. FX University. He holds a PhD from Cambridge, and he's a specialist in Canadian and American foreign policy, the editor-in-chief of International Journal. I'm going. No. Which is often Canada's journal of one of their foremost journals of global policy analysis, author of numerous books. I'll cut it short: Building a Special Relationship, Canada-U.S. Relations, the Eisenhower Era, and North of America, Canadians and the American Century. I will also say, I don't think I'm jumping the gun here. Dr. McKercher was recently promoted again, so this is now Dr. McKercher Unchained, Unbound. You should take your
tenure, baby.
Take your tenure for a spin here. And coming down, we have Dr. Hailey Murphy, my colleague in the Department of Political Science here at St. FX, where she teaches courses in political theory, Canadian politics, research methods, and pretty much everything else. Dr. Murphy is an expert in the area of gender and politics, particularly queer political participation and the politics of recognition. She is currently completing a book under contract from Fernwood Publishing examining LGBTQ rights and queer political history, and she is conducting research about the experience of women in Nova Scotian municipal politics. Very versatile. And Dr. Murphy is also a veteran of this American politics panel, and we're happy to have her back. Okay. Excellent. Now, the engine of this series, Dr. Anna Zuschlag, is the program and research manager at Brian Mulroney Institute of Government here at St. FX. Holds a PhD in American history from Western University, where her work examined representations of masculinity during the Cold War, focusing specifically on images of draft resistance during the Vietnam War. Now, she has taught courses on American history, Canadian history, U.S.-Canada history, and now topical U.S. Hispanic American relations. So please welcome back Dr. Anna Zuschlag. And then finally, closest to me, Dr. Vishwakarma is a professor in the Department of Accounting and Finance at Gerald Schwartz School of Business, again here at St. FX. Holds his PhD in finance from the University of New Orleans. Congratulations on finishing in a fun place. His research interests include real estate, financial econometrics, and corporate finance. He is the author of Fundamentals of Investing, a widely used textbook within Canada. And while Dr. Vishwakarma has been at St. FX the longest, it's his first time here on the U.S. Affairs panel, and hopefully it's an enjoyable experience. So welcome, Dr. Vishwakarma. And now's the time where I threaten everybody. I have to keep this thing on track. I am going to wave at you during your presentations. The first couple are very friendly, and then eventually we hit a mad face, right? Very deep consequences. So let's just try to keep this thing on track. We have a full house today, and people are going to wanted to discuss. So we're going to try to leave some time open. So I'm going to pass it off first here to. I just got to get the order right. This is Dr. McKercher, right? In the right order? Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Thank you, Dr. Zuschlag, for putting this together. Thanks, Dr. Harling-Socker, for your introduction. I guess we met this panel more or less, although Vijay, you weren't here, but it was Greg who was, a year ago, or more or less, to discuss Trump's first 100 days, I guess, in office was the last time we met. And I think we were pretty glum about the state of America and the world 100 days in. I don't know if we're going to be any sunnier ways today, although I will, I think, maybe end on a positive note. If not now, then certainly maybe during the Q&A. But I think when I look at the state of American life, American politics, it's antithetical to everything that I think myself, as a liberal, small L liberal Democrat, believes in. So I believe in limited government, and you have the American president dispatching police forces, basically unaccountable to anyone, to the streets of major American cities and snatching people off the streets, to the point where in the city of Minnesota, there's an underground network of doulas, because people who are immigrants or racialized people are afraid to go to hospitals to give birth because there's snatch squads by Immigration Customs Enforcement. I think that's bad. I think, as someone who believes in a written constitution and checks and balances in a political system, I think a cowed Republican political party that's in control of the majority in the Senate and the House of Representatives that won't enforce any of the laws and checks and balances to keep the president in check is bad. So when the Congress has passed laws, for instance, a ban on TikTok, this might be controversial with some of the younger people in the audience, but TikTok is technically illegal to operate in the United States. And because Donald Trump was given basically a bribe given donations by TikTok CEO, essentially he's just refusing to enforce the legal law of the U.S. land. That's bad. It's bad when Congress is supposed to, for instance, impose tariffs. That's literally the right of Congress under the U.S. Constitution, is to impose taxes and tariffs. And essentially, the Congress has turned its cheek, turned that power over to the U.S. president. We're on the precipice of the American government launching military strikes against Iran, a government that I don't like. But as opposed to, say, someone like George W. Bush, who actually went and got a resolution through Congress, that will just sort of probably happen as the operation in Venezuela did, as the operations occurring in the Caribbean did, as the operations occurring off the Pacific coast of the United States against drug dealers did, as potentially last time some of us met to discuss geopolitics, there was a near war or some sort of military operation against NATO to take over Greenland, which all would have occurred without the U.S. Congress doing anything. So the inability or unwillingness of the U.S. kind of constitutional system to work, I think that's bad. As someone who believes in individual liberty and individual rights, I think the fact that LGBTQ people are living in fear, many of them actually moving to places like Nova Scotia, there's to escape. Again, really repressive laws passed not only at the federal level, but at the state and local levels in the United States is a terrible kind of thing. Whether you like LGBTQ people or not, I don't know. That's not for me to judge what's in your heart, but I think in a pluralistic society in which people should be able to be as diverse as possible, the fact that people can't even put library books with LGBTQ themes on shelves, or that Mouse, a graphic novel that depicts the Holocaust, is too controversial for some members of the Republican Party, is a troubling sort of thing. As someone who believes that fascism is bad and that 40,000 Canadian boys died 80 years ago to prove the point, that's the sort of OG Antifa, if you like, I think it's bad that the Republican Party is welcoming a guy like Nick Fuentes, who I assume maybe some of you in the audience have heard of, or someone like Candace Owens, or someone like Tucker Carlson, people who openly espouse the kind of most vile anti-Semitism that the sort of, campus protesters worried about Gaza, in the kind of fever dreams of kind of editorial pages in the Wall Street Journal, the kind of Gaza protesters came nowhere near the kind of views that people who openly are welcomed in the ranks of the Republican Party and who openly come to the White House espouse. Tucker Carlson, a person who basically kind of denies the Holocaust, was at the White House last week. Pretty remarkable sort of thing. I think that's bad. I could go on. I guess as someone who believes in national security, broadly speaking, and a world in which there's rules and laws to some extent, and that the kind of broad concept of what we might call the West is a good thing, I think the fact that Donald Trump, because of the Mercator projection, thought it would be great to take over Greenland, almost blew up the most successful alliance in human history is bad. I think the fact that the United States government kowtows to and promotes far-right parties in Europe, a fellow like Viktor Orban, is bad. A government that, for all its hypocrisies and kind of criticisms you might have, maybe as campus leftists or something, fundamentally believed in the broadest sense, promoting democracy abroad, has dropped that as a fundamental principle of American foreign policy. I think that's bad. A government that's willing to shred its alliances, economic and otherwise, with countries like Canada for no gain. Maybe Vijay, you'll have some data, and maybe I'll be wrong, but I think no gain in terms of U.S. manufacturing, no gain in terms, actually quite the opposite in terms of turning around trade imbalances, no gain in terms of jobs in manufacturing over the last year or bit, to shred its economic alliances with countries like Canada and Western Europe and Japan, and cede basically the kind of global stage to China is a bad thing. The Trump administration professes to want to confront China, but it's alienating all of its allies in the process of a policy that's doing quite the opposite of what he wants. Why did Mark Carney go to China a month ago? Because Donald Trump hates our country and has shredded our goodwill. He's shredded our economic relationship, and he's doing that with other countries as well. Who hates China? India. Who hates China? Vietnam. Who hates China? Most Western European countries, and all of them are going to make deals with China because Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on them. and shown that the United States is willing to put its economic muscle in this kind of crazed effort to make America great again, as if America was sort of great in 1880 when it wasn't, when it was probably great in 1945. At the head of a huge global alliance. So a number of things that really are bad that Donald Trump is doing. And there's things, of course, that Donald Trump himself is not necessarily doing, but that other people around him are doing too. And so one of the things, we have Dr. Stan in the audience. She's obviously knows a lot about events in Central and Eastern Europe. Our friend Viktor Ormad in Hungary. One of the things he's done to cement himself in power is, of course, media capture, capturing the kind of the media in Hungary. Mr. Putin did the same thing in Russia, getting essentially threatening basically media conglomerates to support the presidential line. And Donald Trump is doing the exact same thing on a much actually accelerated pace than what's going on, or what went on in for instance, in Hungary. And so it's not just that Donald Trump has pressured other people to sort of fall in line, but it's that, again, some people have willingly done so. So Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has gone and presented Donald Trump with a golden iPad and sort of made promises to sort of refigure kind of investment. It's that Donald Trump is holding up essentially Netflix's purchase of Warner Brothers because he'd rather give it to sell it off to CBS Paramount, which is owned by the Ellison family, who are his great friends. These are problems in the American kind of broader system, that there are 2 minutes left. Fantastic. That people are essentially bending the knee to Donald Trump in a way that really they shouldn't have to. And so as someone, again, who believes in something like free enterprise, the fact that you have the American president buying 10% of NVIDIA doesn't seem like a good thing. The fact that you have the United States president essentially operating like the Chinese government in terms of putting controls on what companies can do, the fact that the American president implemented essentially a tariff to monkey around in the free market is a bad thing, not just for Americans, of course, but for people around the world. The fact that the United States, about a year ago, in fact, ended support for the U.S. AID, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk have probably now killed about 5 million people, 6 million people, maybe 10 million people by the end of Donald Trump's first term in office, is a horrific, horrific thing for no gain. The United States had a larger budget deficit last year than it did in the Joe Biden administration. That was with cuts. That was with the Department of Government Efficiency. So even though the U.S. cut things like its World Aid food programs and starved, again, people around the world starving right now because of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, they ran a bigger budget deficit because they also had to cut several $1 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. And they're now going to run $1 billion defense budget. Astronomical. Again, as someone who believes in strong kind of fiscal prudence and balanced budgets, the fact that the United States continues to run multi-trillion-dollar annual budget deficits is a shocking, shocking thing. Anyway, but I'll stop it there. I said I would end on a positive note. Maybe someone can ask me a question about why I would do such a thing. Anyway, thank you.
Sorry, I got to talk to my mic. Next up, we have Dr. Hailey Murphy.
All right, thank you very much. So you were talking about a lot of things that are bad. And one of them that you mentioned was some of the legislation and some of the rhetoric around the LGBTQ community. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on, as well as talking about women's rights more broadly. When we assess the first year of the second Trump presidency, it's important to resist the temptation to treat developments affecting queer people and women as kind of like isolated policy disagreements or matters of differing opinions. This would take us down a road of debating whether queer folks and women have rights, which is not up for debate, at least not for me. So to be clear, what we're witnessing is a situation in which hostility towards gender equality and LGBTQ rights has moved from the margins of American politics, or from the relative margins perhaps, into formal institutional power. So yes, the concern today is Donald Trump himself, but I would also like to point out that the Republican Party in general has become increasingly emboldened to pursue policies that were once considered politically indefensible at federal and state levels of government. And the consequences of these policies are extremely serious and are quantifiable. So I have a couple stats and things like that to share with you guys. For example, according to data collected by the Movement Advancement Project, more than 400,000, I'll say it again, 400,000 transgender Americans have relocated from their home states since the election in search of a safer political and legal environment. People do not just uproot their lives lightly or for no reason. A migration of this scale reflects fear about personal safety, access to healthcare, fears about criminalization, and just like basic stability under the rapidly changing legal conditions for trans folks. Also, since the election, 56% of the transgender and non-binary community have been experiencing direct discrimination based on their gender identity, and nearly half, 47%, have experienced physical harassment. So this is a pretty serious situation. People's lives are being completely upturned by this administration, and I know, I can say at least for myself as a queer person, I would not feel comfortable traveling to the United States. And the Canadian government has issued some warnings, especially for those that have a gender-neutral passport with the X as their gender marker, traveling to the US. And there have been a lot of movements within Canada pressuring the Canadian government to extend more formal warnings. The legislative environment in the US has accelerated this hostility towards queer folks. In 2025 alone, the American Civil Liberties Union tracked more than 600 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced across the United States. The types of bills include things like education, so things like access to education, but also kind of what you mentioned about available books, things like that, healthcare access, public participation in general, and legal recognition. The sheer volume of these pieces of legislation, over 600, signals coordination as well as normalization across jurisdictions. Trump's rhetoric has played a central role in legitimating this climate. A recurring example is the sustained political focus on transgender participation in women's sports. The issue has been framed as an existential threat to fairness, despite the empirical reality that transgender athletes represent 0.002% of US college athletes and approximately 0.001% of all Olympic athletes. On top of this, recent studies from reputable journals that have been replicated also indicate that transgender women or transgender athletes, after 1 to 3 years of hormone therapy, do not have measurable advantages in strength or aerobic ability compared to cisgender women. Plus, just generally speaking, I find it pretty hard to accept considering the proven track record of 5 minutes, the proven track record of how Trump treats women, or even based on his recent comments about the American women's hockey team, that he cares at all about the well-being of women and women's sports, or just women in general. I would be curious to see if he could even name more than one professional women's athlete. And so anyways, based on this, we can see there's a statistically negligible, like extremely, extremely small group of people, trans women in sport, that has become this like defining political obsession. Trans women are being used really as a smokescreen for Trump's own crimes, his presence in the Epstein files, and his increasing mental and physical deterioration. Another deeply troubling development in this first year has been the increasing portrayal of queer and transgender people as inherent threats to public safety. Political rhetoric has repeatedly suggested that trans people represent danger in schools, bathrooms, healthcare spaces, or just existing at all. That type of framing is, meant to provoke fear and is profoundly disconnected from all available evidence. Throughout history, we know that fear is a useful, though harmful, political propaganda tool. Oops. There's no credible body of research demonstrating that transgender people commit violent crimes at higher rates than the general population. In fact, research shows the opposite. Transgender Americans are significantly more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Study after study consistently show elevated rates of assault, harassment, and homicide against queer and transgender individuals compared with the rest of the population. When isolated criminal incidents that involve transgender folks occur, they are elevated in political discourse as proof of social danger. Outlier cases cannot be responsibly used to characterize an entire population. Mass violence in the United States is overwhelmingly committed by cisgendered men. And analyses of mass shootings over the past several decades routinely find that more than 95% of violent perpetrators are male. Similarly, crime statistics show that men commit the overwhelming majority of violent offenses such as homicide and sexual assault. So let's create a consistent logic here. When women and feminist scholars point to these patterns, as structural concerns tied to masculinity or violence or socialization, we hear not all men. But if we accept this principle that statistical patterns do not justify stigmatizing entire populations, which I'll accept, then to be intellectually consistent, this requires extending the same reasoning to transgender people. The not all men argument states that individuals cannot be reduced to a demographic identity, and applied honestly, it is far more accurate when discussing queer and transgender communities who remain statistically unlikely to be violent offenders. What we are seeing is, instead of like a revelation of violence or fear, is a construction of moral panic. A small and vulnerable minority is positioned as a threat in order to justify their discrimination, and then fear becomes the governing tool. And when fear replaces evidence, rights become negotiable. And so political narratives shape public permission structures, meaning what we believe to be acceptable. So therefore, when national leaders like Donald Trump and others frame marginalized groups as dangerous, discrimination becomes easier to justify both socially and within the legislature. At the same time, the administration's record on women's rights more broadly also demonstrates that appeals to protecting women, for example, in the athletes example that I said, are highly selective. I have 30 seconds left, so I haven't gotten the chance to talk about women's rights yet, but that's okay because we have lots of time. So eventually I'll get to some of these stats and things that I have about women's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Yeah, Dr. Vishwakarma is going to have some slides about it. Yeah.
Okay, I have to accept that I have never spoken using handheld mic and giving a presentation. I'm not a political scientist, and that's why whatever I'm presenting is based on the data, and this is what I'm going to do here, okay? So here is my presentation, and what we are going to see here is what does this 1 year of Trump administration look like, okay? So what 1 year gave is marked with a macroeconomic resilience, increase uncertainty in geopolitical area, increase uncertainty in tariffs, and all around the world, different governments, markets are trying to navigate what is happening, okay? They're trying to navigate this change uncertainty. And this is what I'm going to present in my presentation. So this is my outline: stock market dispersion, macroeconomic divergence, the new tariff architecture, strategic horizon, and at the end, I'm going to give summary. What is this thing that is coming at the down? Okay. I thought I never printed that thing. So what is that? Yes, yeah. Okay. And I don't want to get into trouble if something is happening here. Okay. All right. So let's see this thing. First is stock market dispersion. So first slide is, as I will go through different slides, there are many tariff announcements, but for us, we are going to see particularly focus on 5 announcements, okay? And that's what you need to remember. The first one is when the new administration came in. The second one is I call fentanyl tariff announcement, which is a major impact. And the fourth one is tariff on steel, aluminum, renegotiation, and so on, okay? And then the fourth one is a major one. That's a Liberation Day that Trump administration called, okay? And the last one is August 1. That's a rate hike on non-USMCA Canadian good and on copper, okay? So these dates I will indicate on my chart with the lines, okay, from left to right. So first one is, this is the US market. S&P 500 is their benchmark index, and VIX is a volatility index. It is also called fear factor. So what you see here is, as we have different announcements, market get worried, but then stock market continue rising. What we notice here is the fourth announcement, that is a Liberation Day. If you look at the fourth arrow, where fear increased, market tanked, but then market sheds off its fear, okay? And the reason is that, yes, market is worried about these announcements, but they are not expecting any total economic collapse. And that's why they continue doing this thing, okay? Another thing that we note here is that although market continue growing, but this growth is not uniform. If you look at the, this thing don't have a pointer, but if you look at the index, in 1 year, US index gave us 16.39% of the return. But this return does not come from all sector. It is majorly driven by IT sector, and that too through AI story. And another thing is communication services, okay? So it is not uniform. It is only through some sectors. Let's see the Canadian market. S&P TSX, this is a benchmark Canadian index. And what we see again, very similar story with a slight difference. Every time there is an announcement, market get worried, but again, this sheds off their fear. What we notice here, if you see the red arrow, this is a Liberation Day announcement. And this has a major impact on Canadian market. You see that the volatility increased, the fear increased in the market tanked, but again, it continued growing. Similar to the US market, this growth is not uniform. Another thing that you will notice here is that our Canadian index gave better return than US market. The US market gave only 16% return. Canadian index gave us a return of 32%, which is much better, double. It happened only after many, many decades. And again, why this happened? This happened because of only 2 sectors, materials and financial sector, okay? So let's look at the macroeconomic divergence. Here are a couple of US indicators. You see that CPI is increasing, that is the price index, unemployment decreasing in the range, inflation in the range. But what we notice here is that consumer confidence, important factor, that started is going down in US market, which is a cause of concern. All other things so far looks okay. All right, look at the Canadian economic indicator, very similar. CPI, that is the price index, increasing. Core is much higher than the baseline. The unemployment rate start decreasing. Inflation within the range of BOC. But important thing, consumer confidence is still intact in Canada. This is the data, okay? And as we see this price thing is again not uniform. In Canada, the prices, housing prices, the food prices, durables, laptops, cell phones, anything that is connected to the supply chain, they got more pricier, okay? So it's not a uniform price increase. Let's look at this Canadian GDP, what is happening here. Look at the fourth line. This is a Liberation Day announcement. The moment that thing happened, you see that Canadian GDP start decreasing. It has a major impact, okay? And what happened by the end of the year, Canadian economy tried to find out the alternative way. I will talk about that thing and it will come back. But again, the impact is huge. We can see from this chart with all the tariff announcement, we do have impact on Canadian economy, okay? Okay, what we get from this tariff, in summary, what US is getting is average tariff, which was earlier was 2.5%, and now it is 6.8%. The sectoral impact, particularly on aluminum and steel, it is now 50%. One important thing, how much they earn from customer revenue, customs revenue. Custom revenue that they get from the tariff, it surged 192%. Government has earned $287 billion in 1 year because of tariff. But this is not the true thing. True thing is this is not going to help them in long run. In the long run, this tariff is going to hurt their economy. Their GDP will go down, their wages will go down, and the burden on individual household will increase. It is already $1,000, is going to increase $1,300. Okay, strategic horizon. Here is that, what do we see with the announcement? Look at the second line. This is what is a fentanyl tariff, February 1. That is what happened. So what you see here is that export from Canada decreased severely as soon as that thing happened, and it continued, okay? This is overall Canadian trade balance. You see that as soon as this tariff thing happened, the deficit increased. That means the Canadian export decreased overall. But what you see, important thing, by the end of the year, Canadian economy tried to find out an alternative way to start their increase their export, and what they did is 22% of the export that goes to US is now diverted to European Union, and that's the reason why this thing is kind of becoming better at the end. Summary. See, so far, as we have seen in the chart, inflation is in the range, but in the long run, inflation is going to increase. Monetary gap, currently, we have a huge monetary gap between the Fed and BOC, and this will have a downward pressure on our Canadian dollar, is going to depreciate in future. That's not bad. It's going to help our export if Canadian dollar depreciate. Golden age versus reality. See, all this tariff thing was sold on the idea that there will be golden era, manufacturing will pick up, but this is not happening. The evidence is that manufacturing is slowing. All that employment growth is in health and service sector, not in manufacturing.
Perfect timing. I could have given you some extra seconds because the French, but you're perfect. Okay, and last but not least, we have Anna Zuschlag.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vijay, for joining the band. You're sort of like the new lead. The old lead didn't come back for the world tour, and you stepped in. So thank you. In October 2024, I pleaded with the better angels of American nature, invoking Abraham Lincoln, the lessons of history, and basic human decency, and warned that returning Donald Trump to power would be a grievous error, not disruptive, but corrosive, not wistful and hopeful, but retrograde and destructive. In April 2025, I despaired over the first 100 days at the unprecedented acceleration of authoritarianism in the United States, a speed that shocked scholars of dictatorships and autocracies. Yet here we are, some 12 months into the second Trump presidency, after a State of the Union address so laden with racist overtures and fascistic dehumanization of those deemed by the regime to be the enemy, all of course punctuated with permission to rain down violence against non-believers, that one could be forgiven for wondering where Leni Riefenstahl had put her camera. The enthralled sycophants and their feverish ovations were called a Klan rally, only further serving to reinforce that the Republican Party is fully captured by a demented, decomposing, malignant narcissist convict whose name supposedly appears in the Epstein files more times than Jesus does in the Bible. We are in a time of monsters. We are no longer speculating about what might happen, but inventorying the horror of what has. The shock is no longer that elections have consequences. The shock is how swiftly the consequences have metastasized. Institutions once assumed to be resistant to personal whim have proven alarmingly fragile, as evidenced by the vile mugshot banner of Trump unfurled last week outside the Department of Justice. Once hallowed agencies have been hollowed out, emptied of institutional knowledge. Mechanisms of oversight dismantled, civil servants replaced not by seasoned administrators, but by toadies fluent in grievance and contempt, glorying in anti-intellectualism and junk science, which is a boon for anyone rooting for the next pandemic. If not yet obliterated, whole departments now make their constituents' lives worse, spewing pronouncements on backward policies, all calibrated to the moods of one man. The lesson of this first year goes well beyond power corrupts. It is that power, when fused with bread and circuses, hate, and impunity, like the nothing from the never-ending story, devours all. It took Adolf Hitler years to dismantle the Weimar Republic's guardrails. It has taken a fraction of that time to bend or bypass those in the US. This first year has been defined by purges and decadent pageantry. A White House so gilded in gold that it invokes images of the debauched faux palaces of Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad. It now houses a cabinet full of secretaries who confuse cruelty with strength, an attorney general who pulls out a burn book when testifying before Congress, and an FBI director more concerned with selfies with gold medal male Olympians than finding Nancy Guthrie. The Supreme Court has extended virtual blanket immunity to a president who has no scruples, surrounded by hyper-zealot worm-tongues like Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt, who are acting out their teenage masturbatory wet dreams, which were no secret during the 2024 election, having been written out in clear, tyrannical detail in Project 2025. The levers of accountability haven't just ground to a halt, they have been sheared off by the buzzsaw of corruption because pardons are for sale. And through it all, the performance continues. Grievance sessions masquerading as diplomacy in Davos and in front of the UN General Assembly, hours-long televised cabinet meetings making slavish flattery a fine-tuned art, and social media decrees known as truths have become the new style of policymaking. Digital disinformation, hyper-partisan media, weakened local journalism, and a political culture wholly tolerant of violations of norms and decency have meant the annihilation of democratic guardrails has not required the suspension of the Constitution, but the steady normalization of conduct that in any other era, in any other democratic country, would have been disqualifying and shamed. This year has clarified the unhinged and unshackled ambitions of those in power. It has clarified something else. None of this emerged in a vacuum. There are historical precedents for gerrymandering, voter suppression, the failures of the Electoral College, the weaponization of disinformation, the denigration of knowledge and expertise, and the detainment of American citizens. These all predate the Trump regime. Andrew Jackson initiated the Trail of Tears. Ulysses S. Grant had the Whiskey Ring. Joseph McCarthy had his list of communists. FDR had Japanese American internment. Nixon had the Watergate Hotel. And George W. had Abu Ghraib. And on and on. The dark currents of demagoguery have always flowed beneath the American story. The difference now is velocity and the open rejection of any pretense to following the rule of law, at home, abroad, or on the open seas. Communities of color, immigrants, LGBTQ plus Americans, religious minorities, we must note with grim recognition that what feels unprecedented to some has long been lived reality for others. State power is not neutral. The language of human rights competes with the language of deal making and manufactured victimhood bestowed upon the privileged, used as a cudgel to keep the capital O other in line. The rules-based order, however imperfect and often hypocritical, nonetheless provided scaffolding and a thin veneer of trust. The cruelty has always been the point, but the white public could feel safe knowing that some level of dissent would be tolerated and seen as a release valve, minimizing pressure on a repressive establishment, that small gains would make this systemic inequalities and the game of peekaboo with white nationalism tolerable for those not overly impacted. That curtain has now been shredded, and the man behind it is visible for those who choose to pay attention. And yet still some 41% of Americans approve of the Trump regime. How can this be? How can life go on when Americans are being killed in the streets, patrolled by what is quickly becoming an extrajudicial militarized force bent on meeting deportation quotas and filling concentration camps? This, too, is part of the American paradox: crisis and continuity, spectacle and banality, the banality of evil. Authoritarian drift rarely announces itself with sirens. It arrives wrapped in normalcy, constructed upon ignorance, accompanied by the ineffectual whinging of an opposition whose leaders are unable to meet the moment. This is buffered by distraction, by a birthday military parade through the heart of the nation's capital, UFC championships on the White House lawn next to the gaping maw where the East Wing once stood. So what has the first year taught us? That norms without enforcement and accountability, as enshrined in law, are merely suggestions. That democratic institutions require democratic actors who believe in democracy for everyone at home and abroad, including vigorous and righteous membership in multilateral organizations who agree that Putin is not friend but foe. That outrage alone is not strategy, and firmly worded letters do not a resistant movement make. If there is hope, and there must be, it lies not in nostalgia for a pristine past of greatness that never existed, but in a sober reckoning with the structural weaknesses that made the Trump regime and its wholesale attack on the American experiment not just possible, but successful. Staunching the bleeding will require more than winning the next election. It will demand confronting the architecture of white nationalism, rebuilding public institutions with equity and social justice in mind, defending and supporting journalism, strengthening civic education, and indeed the entire education system, and insisting that public service is a duty rather than a chance to sue the IRS, which you control, for $10 billion. Push your family's Bitcoin enterprise, accept gold tchotchkes from tech billionaires, take someone else's Nobel Prize, and take a luxury airliner from Qatar. Democracy is not self-executing. It is a birthright not immune to decay or the caprices of the Robert Supreme Court. It is an ongoing project dependent on participation, courage, and sacrifice, something that the people of LA, Chicago, and Minnesota have shone the light on. Rustin Power, Nicole Good, and Alex Preddy. A year in, the question is no longer whether the guardrails are under strain. They are snarled in places and completely gone in others. The question is whether enough Americans, and indeed global citizens, and I implore Canadians to be alert, to what is happening. I'm taking my organizer's prerogative here. I implore Canadians to be alert to what is happening here at home. Across political ideologies, across states and nations and in provinces, across differences with our fellow human beings, we must come together. Are we willing to reimagining the guardrails before it's truly too late? We are at the end of the beginning of the regime's first year, but it doesn't have to be the beginning of the end of the remnants of what made the US a model for democracies. However deeply imperfect it has been, and it has been truly flawed across its 250 years of existence. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Okay, so we're gonna do some questions, and this is my opportunity to time myself and keep myself on track here. And we're doing it in a bit of a mixed up order. We're gonna go with Dr. Murphy, Dr. Vishwakarma, and then Dr. McKercher, and then Dr. Zuschlag. And I have to scratch my head and think of some questions, but let's start here with one for Dr. Murphy. You were talking about 600 bills coming out of the movement against or the movement to legislate around transgender issues, often in kind of a restrictive way. And I'm thinking back here to the early 2000s under the Bush government. Some of a lot of pushback at the state level. I'm kind of curious if you're seeing kind of the politics of polarization around American federalism, and whether or not there's governors in democratic states that are picking this up, or is the general strategy to run from the issue? Which is to say, is there a general norm that is pushing across the country, or do you see this as an active fighting battle on a federal level?
Thank you. I mean, there's definitely a concentration of these bills in southern states at the state level. Democratically run states far less likely to have anti-LGBTQ bills, but not completely immune. And while there's these around 600 anti-gay bills, essentially, the majority of them are anti-trans, but not all of them. And some of them are far more extreme than others. And also, depending on what the issue at hand is, the more or less likely you are to see people push back or what have you. So, for example, things that get a lot of public attention, like anti-drag bills, are easier to support and less like politically damning, I think, for some Democratic legislators, whereas like washroom bills, things like that are a lot more, there's a lot more hate and a lot more vitriol because people have, like, what did you say? And like bad science, junk science about these things. So then you have even Democrats being like, well, this is a concern that we should really debate. So I don't really have like a perfect answer for your question, but that most of these bills are state bills. Most of them are in the South. What seems to be one of the absolute worst states is Tennessee for it. And yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm going to push on one thing that I did. We were on a panel just over a year ago before the election, and we were talking about the role of gender and the opposition to Trump in Trump's first term. and a lot of the earlier opposition revolved around gender and was organized by women's movements. And I'm kind of curious, when you look at the first year of Trump in 2017 and the movement against him versus what's happened in 2021 or 21, do you see significant changes in like the organizing logic or the role of women's movement in that, or do you see kind of continuity in the people?
There's definitely continuity in certain ways. It's a very different movement with very different focus, and I think with very different urgency. So I think the answer I gave you at our last panel was, well, it looks kind of like the women's movement is not doing anything as a single movement, is what I kind of responded last time. I think this time, I would argue, but maybe I'm biased, that the LGBTQ2 plus community is very strong and making headway. We're not seeing the same type of like March on Washington style thing that happened in the first term, or in the first time he was elected. And but at the same time, what did that march do, right? As opposed to like the sustained effort against ICE, which is not a women's movement in general, but like they're working to actually get ICE out of places like, Minnesota. So I think that, well, it doesn't look the same at all. There's still a sustained women's movement, extra strong queer movement in the United States. By necessity, it's joining others. Right. And then you see almost like a bracketing or a posturing towards the issue of the day. Right. Renee Good was a queer woman. And there was some solidarity within that protest, an anti-ICE protest, women's rights, queer activists, all kind of rallying around the same thing. And not to like play oppression Olympics or something like this, but like a much more grave situation than like the women in their pussy hats in 2016 walking in Washington, right? So yeah.
Start this back up again. No, I need it, or else or else I will talk forever. Okay. Just moving on. To Dr. Vishwakarma. I like all the graphics. So let me ask some kind of technical questions here. So the first one has to do with the stock market in a year where the U.S. tech-dominated headlines. You're putting it up. The Canadian TSX actually doubled the performance of the S&P. So as an investment expert, how do you explain this kind of the revenge of the old economy here? And what does this tell us about where the investment world is heading in 2025, 2026?
Thank you. Great question. Okay. So first we note that S&P 500, which is US main benchmark index, which gave 16% return, and S&P TSX Composite, which is Canadian benchmark index, gave 32% return. So why that happened? What happened in the US market and other places also, because of this tariff, uncertainty increases. Whenever there is uncertainty, fear, people like to go for hard assets, and that is gold, silver. When this thing comes, Canada has an edge, and all our material sector, mining, that grows. And that's the reason. The other thing is, during this time, two things happen. The Fed was trying to control the interest rate, slowing it down. On the Canadian side, we are helping to boost the economy, and that helped the financial sector. So this is old economy. Finance and material help the Canadian economy, and a lot of people like to invest in hard asset during uncertainty. Another factor what happened is during this time, as the stock prices of the Canadian companies become cheaper, when they become cheaper, it become more valuable. So that's the reason people like to started investing in Canadian stock, and that's why we got better result.
Thank you very much. And just a second one, it does look like the CUSMA, the old NAFTA, the review is not going to be routine. Lots of uncertainty. So from just looking at the financial risk, how should Canadian businesses, investors prepare for that potential unraveling of the North American integration?
Yeah, again, very relevant question, because this is a constant fear now whether CUSMA will be reviewed or not. Will it be scrapped totally, or will it be reviewed every year or 6 years? So first thing is, with this talk, there is an end of predictability. And when predictability is gone, which is super bad for any business. Businesses like predictability. So this is hurting. What is at stake? $550 billion of export that goes to US, which is 70 to 80% of the total export is at stake. And it is all because of this renewing or not renewing. On top of that, there is other that we have seen, Section 232 tariffs, which are more than 50% or 50% for steel, aluminum, copper. So those sectors are also hurting. So, and when this thing is happening, this thing is not uniform. If you look at the manufacturing side of the Canada, all the the Ontario, the Quebec, which is manufacturing hub, there is a huge loss of employment. So when we look at that graph, unemployment is decreasing, it is not uniform. Some provinces, some places got badly hurt. And in terms of strategy, what we call is Carney strategy. And this is what is happening, what we have to do, and what government is doing. They are trying to diversify their businesses, export from US to Asia, Europe. And another thing would be, like in finance, we have learned many times that asset diversification is important. But now, after seeing this thing, this is so new that now we say that asset diversification is not enough. You need to look at the geopolitical diversification also. So this is another strategy that people have to adapt.
Thank you very much. And going down to the very end of the table, Dr. McKercher, one thing that was running through my head as you were talking, you were saying, kind of come back to the refrain of this is bad. And it does make me kind of think about, okay, so we're talking about bad, but it's got to be good for somebody, right? In the sense that there's got to be political gain or economic gain for these actions. And I'm kind of curious how you see the political model, Trump's global model that he's operating in his head, because he must think that some of these actions, the consistency of some of these actions are going to pay off. So I'm kind of curious how you take that, or is it just, or do you see this as like more of like a rent extraction presidency where he's kind of in it, and then the person who benefits is me in my pocket? Or is there more of a political logic to these actions that are not benefiting Canada?
Sure. I mean, it's a policy's basically to benefit himself and his donors in the most corrupt possible way. So, there's been this several $1 trillion tax cut, again, for the wealthiest Americans. At the same time, the U.S., the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it was called, basically cut all healthcare subsidies for like local regional hospitals throughout the United States, and it's a bit complicated to explain, but basically the healthcare premiums that people will pay under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, are due to skyrocket about now. So the very Americans that he purports to care the most about, the people living in the heartland, in the rural areas, the people who are not making enough money to have, or in the jobs in New York City or Los Angeles or other sorts of places where they have, health insurance provided through their employers, people working at Walmart, let's say, are the people whose healthcare premiums are now about to skyrocket and their local hospitals are closing at the same time in which the wealthiest Americans are receiving a tax cut. Like, that just seems the most kind of basic policies. In terms of the tariffs are increasing inflation on products that Americans consume. The previous presidential election was fought on the issue of inflation. Donald Trump said he would, on day one, make food prices go down. Guess what? They didn't. He would make food prices of other products go down. Guess what? They didn't. So again, the average Americans who are paying their pocket, they have less money in their pocket because of Donald Trump's policies. There's been no reshoring of jobs to speak of through these policies, although again, we'll see what pans out and how long the tariffs last, and if there's increased investment that creates manufactured jobs. But the growth in the U.S. economy has been largely in AI, which will take jobs from Americans to benefit, again, a very few companies that have put money in his pocket, and those people were the people in the front row at his inauguration. So again, these are policies not meant to enrich the average American, but in fact to make them poorer.
And just a second question, kind of quite a bit different. I'm just curious how you line up the Canadian strategy in Trump's second term compared to the Canadian strategy in Trump's first term. First term, there seemed to be a full court press going to the state governments, going all through Congress. And do you see like a repeat of that full court press, or do you think that the current government is being a little bit more cautious, perhaps? What's your read on?
Sure. So for non-specialists in the first Trump administration, there was essentially a donut strategy. Trump was the center of the donut, not because he ate the rest of the donut, but because they went around Donald Trump, basically to all his advisors, to all the sort of state chambers of commerce, to state governors, to the state legislatures, but also legislatures in Congress and the Senate, the kind of so-called quote-unquote grown-ups in the room at the various agencies and departments throughout the U.S. government, and basically lobbied them very, very effectively to get the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement renewed, or the new CUSMA agreement. Obviously, that can't be done in this Trump administration, in part because all of those kind of grown-up people, if you like, are no longer part of the Trump administration. They're all sort of sycophantic people who hate Canada, not because they actually hate Canada, but because Donald Trump has told them to. And so Kristi Noem, the U.S. Homeland Security person, a year ago, she went to the Haskell Free Library, just as an example of this. This is a library on the border between Vermont and Quebec. There's a town that's basically, the border runs through the town. There's a Canadian town on one side and an American town on the other. This library was built. Basically, the border runs through it. And she stood and danced on one side and said 51st state, and then danced on the other and said USA, 51st state, USA, 51st state, USA. There's a hatred of Canada that's sort of filtered down. So the people that Canada would normally lobby, both in Congress, at the state level, state chambers of commerce, and certainly in the White House and the administration, are people who are on the Trump train, if you like, in terms of this irrational desire to rip up our free trade agreement and our alliance, et cetera, et cetera. To the point where, again, just after the loss to the men's Olympic hockey team, they found a tweet that Justin Trudeau had sent a year ago when Canada beat the United States at the Four Nations Cup, and basically retweeted it, or whatever, the retruthed, or whatever the goddamn thing is, pardon my French. I'm tenured, so I can say these things now. And basically put an AI image of a bald eagle killing a goose or something. So they clocked that Justin Trudeau a year ago had bragged that Canada had beaten the U.S. Men's hockey team at the Four Nations Cup, and then decided to reach. So there's a deep trolling antipathy toward Canada there. So our regular kind of lobbying efforts have proven ineffective so far.
Thanks very much. And then coming on to Dr. Zuschlag's talk, and I just want to push on a couple pieces of this. There's a claim that's made that the institutions are fragile, and it does have me wondering how much of the change to the bureaucratic state do we expect to exist in 5 years versus how much of it is banners and personnel that are going to cycle out with the next election? So can you just talk about some of the permanence, or what do you think is going to be permanent and what do you think is going to be transitory to the state and it broadly?
Well, I think, as Dr. McKercher said, the adults in the room are gone, and the sycophants are left. And one of the things that Trump was doing in the transition between the last Trump administration and Joe Biden coming in was basically planting true believers in institutions, so that they would be harder to root out if a Democratic president were to be elected again. I think that generations of destruction have been wrought upon the American state that will maybe never be able to be rebuilt. Dr. McKercher mentioned USAID. That was built around the importance and the belief in soft power and diplomacy, that feeding starving people, allowing people access to medications that would prevent HIV infections and malaria and things like that. That was about spreading goodwill and democracy around the world, and they deep sixed that. And as Dr. McKercher also said, by the end of the regime, if it does come to an end, there will be millions of people who will have died just simply from those, you said, cuts. So I think that the damage is maybe not permanent, but it will take successive Democratic presidents to fix. But they also have to want to fix it, because a lot of times things will change, and then the old boss is kind of the same as the new boss, and vice versa, and they kind of like the way that things were run before, and so maybe that stays the same. But I think that the damage has been swift and deep.
Just a second one on the same theme. You have an interesting comment there about the difference between this kind of period of democratic regression or backsliding or whatever term we want to put on it versus previous ones was the velocity. And I'm curious, do you see the velocity issue being something related to the party or the person or something related to media? What do you, why do things seem to be happening quicker than in past eras as you see it?
Well, this is the culmination of decades of Republican. Republicans have a long-term vision and have had this thought going back to wanting to destroy the New Deal, and like they started it at the grassroots and took over, state level, like dog catcher, school boards, and all the way up. So this has been a long-term project. So the apparatus was there. You have people like Russell Vought and Stephen Miller, who had all of this written down. I won't repeat how I described it, but they had a textbook written for them, and they have systematically gone through Project 2025 and completed the job. And they had the Biden years to be able to get their acts together. And like I said, the people who may have put the brakes on were kicked out of the party. And so they have carte blanche to do what they want. But this has been long-term. This has been a long-term goal of the hard right conservatives.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point, I've got to ask my questions. I've got to be greedy at the mic a bit, and now you get to ask your questions. And it does have some explicit instructions for me. Moderator will not hand a mic to audience members. I will be running around the room, and I will be playing like 1990s talk show. So let's open it up for questions. You're going to make me run to the back. It's okay. I'll get my steps in. Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Tom. I won't get my last name. You guys didn't notice, you didn't mention anything about Black nationalism, like how he's affected that at all. But
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that?
you didn't mention anything about how he's affected like the Black nationalism movement,
What do you mean by that?
like how he's like dismantled it, like anything about that.
That Trump has dismantled Black nationalism?
Well, in general.
Oh, do you mean like?
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You didn't mention much about that.
There's a laundry list of things that Donald Trump's done, so I guess we
Yes.
missed some things. Sure.
I mean, you agree with like Black nationalism, like
Are you couching that as a positive, or I'm just not sure like the premise of
Like African American rights, or
But, like-
what? Like the Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan or something, or?
If we have somebody speak to just well, we'll do one, but I don't know if anybody wants to speak to the government's relations with the Black community or not. Just broadly defined. We can come back
Not
to
quite
it.
sure what the-
We'll
Yeah,
come
no,
back to it. All right.
Kind of. Yeah.
I'll just run over. Oh, just introduce.
Hi, I'm Courtney. So my question's regarding specifically the Venezuelan American conflict and what that means in a Canadian context regarding the pipeline building. Since Alberta is a massive distributor of crude oil, obviously, and Venezuela is also a crude oil export now, I'm just wondering how that would affect the Canadian economy, specifically in the context of the pipeline.
I mean, Venezuela, I can't remember quite the number off the top of my head, but it exports like an infinitesimally small amount of crude oil, in part because, I mean, it's been a socialist state that has not kept up with the existing kind of oil infrastructure. It's also hounded out most international companies, oil companies, from investing there. And so the existing infrastructure has basically crumbled away. And so if it is going to rival Canada, for instance, as an exporter of crude oil, and to be frank, it is the same kind of thick, heavy oil that Alberta does export. So it is a competitor in that sense. That it will be many, 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 many years from now before that ever happens, like 10 or 20 plus years, because no company actually, U.S. oil company, wants to invest in it. So Donald Trump had a meeting of U.S. oil executives. Oil companies, I should say, are not adverse to investing in countries with poor economic or human rights records, etc. Witness most of the Middle East, for instance. But even they don't want to invest in this country. I can't remember. It was the CEO maybe of BP or Shell, one of these huge oil majors, basically said, we've been nationalized twice in Venezuela. We've basically lost our investments twice. Third time, we're not going to do it. So it's potentially a threat to the Canadian or Alberta economy like 20 plus years from now. And I don't know if we'll still be using the same amount of oil even in 20 plus years. Not quite sure. So does that answer your question, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's a immediate pressure to build the pipeline to export crude away from the United States, in fact. Yeah. But I think Venezuela is not going to replace Alberta crude at the Texas refineries. In fact, Alberta crude replaced Venezuelan crude at the Texas refineries when Venezuela got a socialist government and went to hell in the early 2000s.
Yeah, so I have a question about Doug Brown, retired political scientist.
I'm keeping this in.
I see. Okay, very good. I find I'm looking for grasping at straws of optimism and for the future. And a prominent political scientist, U.S. some years ago, said, when you have a president that is attempting to usurp power, and there are at least 5 major sets of institutions in the United States that have the capacity to fight back and to check that power. One of obviously is Congress. The other is the Supreme Court. The third is the military. The fourth are the state governments themselves, and then the fifth is the media. And so, and I don't expect you to, cover all of them, but it seems strange that no one has mentioned that John Roberts has, taken some leadership in the U.S. Supreme Court and knocked down, the one of the big tariff measures of the Trump government. But what more can we expect? This may be just our winter of discontent, and around the corner is going to be spring and summer of Trump just steadily weakening. That would be a theory that I would propose.
From what I have read about the tariff decision, it's actually quite shallow and weak. And I believe it was Kavanaugh basically gave him a roadmap to get around it, and he has already indicated he'll find other ways. And we have other big decisions coming down the pike, like birthright citizenship, and the Roberts court has already basically indicated they're happy to either kick the can down the road until the damage is so far done it doesn't matter what decision they make, or they will just acquiesce and write decisions that have giant loopholes in them. Most of the 5 pillars of the American system that you named have been largely captured. So we have ABC, CBS, CBS, the home of Edward R. Murrow, is now controlled by Barry Weiss, right? Like it's this kind of hooks into the idea of the velocity that we're a year out, and those 5 pillars are compromised, and it took years for Orban to get to where he had to be, because he had to build a coalition of the willing, as you would, to get what he wanted. Trump had everything in place. So, he had state legislatures that were already doing his dirty work and had been for years. So they just had to come online with the federal government. The military, Pete Hegseth, he's a Fox News weekend anchor.
And an alcoholic.
Who used Signal to and openly was talking about classified information. So, like I said, I hope there's hope. And what we have seen in Minnesota, the next No Kings March is March 28th. We have the midterms coming up, but I would like there to be hope. I think that a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. And we have someone who likely has frontotemporal dementia and is literally decomposing in front of our eyes. But he's got people who are along for the ride and see him as the vehicle to making their dreams come true. So I would love there to be hope. My hope is that countries will stand up, that Carney holds the line the way he has been, that the European Union comes together, that people stand up to him and push back.
I did say in my comments that I did have hope, and then I didn't get a chance to get there. One of the hopes is that in terms of the judiciary, it's clear that Donald Trump and his administration, they've tried to put opponents of Donald Trump in jail, and basically grand juries have thrown out the charges basically as bogus kinds of things, and serious attorneys who've been attorneys general working for the U.S. government have resigned in protest. So, average people, when given the evidence on these lack of a pun, trumped up charges against James Comey or Letitia James, other people. The grand juries have said, okay, you can't press charges. So a year ago, I was fearful that the rule of law, such as opponents of the Trump administration would be jailed. It hasn't really happened. I mean, there's 3 more years, who knows? The thing, though, is if supporters of the Trump administration or people who are willing to bribe the Trump administration get off scot-free. And so there was a guy, an investor in crypto schemes from a Chinese national who basically had been jailed by the Biden administration, and he bought $50 million in Trump Bitcoin or Trump coin or whatever the hell it is. And lo and behold, the charges were dropped by the. So a number of other cases of people, basically everyone in the Epstein file with an R next to their name. Well, it's not the Epstein file, sorry. But all the Donald Trump and his friends implicated in the Epstein file, none of them are being prosecuted, right? So if you're friends of Donald Trump, or if you donate to Donald Trump, or if you buy Trump coin, or make a donation to Trump PAC or Trump World Mutual, the charges will be dropped against you. So in one sense, the rule of law is holding, and that trumped up charges against Trump opponents is not happening, but because grand juries, average Americans, a jury of people's peers can see that these charges are, but friends of the Trump administration, there's just no rule of law for them. They can, if you're a white collar criminal, the next 3 years are awesome for you, right? The other shoot of hope is this is a time, because there's no guardrails, or there's fewer guardrails, because a lot of the adults in the room are not there. Americans are getting like real undiluted Trumpism. Real Project 2025 Trumpism. There's an expression that young people will know, FAFO, fuck around and find out. Like I have tenure, I can say that. Americans fucked around last November 2024, and now they're finding out. Real undiluted Trumpism with no guardrails. And you know what's happening is Americans getting real undiluted Trumpism are turning against Donald Trump. Now, polls, whatever they are, political support, whatever they are, but Donald Trump is underwater by 40 points on the economy, which is like a thing that Republicans, going back to Ronald Reagan, that's their number one issue that Republicans pull highly on, minus 40 points on the economy. Donald Trump is under by 15 points on immigration, the single issue that he campaigned on the most. He's underwater in 15 points. Because Americans are seeing people snatched off the street. Not just the criminals, that's what he campaigned on, we deport criminals, but average everyday Americans, millions of them living in fear, right? Hispanic people voted for Donald Trump in very high numbers in November 2024, not because he was going to go after their families, but because he was going to go after the illegal criminals. Well, guess what? They're going after their families. And so he's underwater by 50 points with Hispanics. He's lost all of the support that he won with Hispanics. To go back to the question in the back, he skyrocketing support amongst Black Americans in the 2024 election. He's lost all that. So people getting pure undiluted stuff, they don't like it. Right? Donald Trump on the campaign trail, people love. He tells funny things. He tells funny stories. He says outlandish stuff. Donald Trump in power, ooh, they don't like him. They don't like him. And they didn't like him in 2020. And they didn't like him in the midterm elections in 2018. And they didn't like it when he came out of the midterm elections in 2022. And they didn't like him, well, we'll see, I guess, in 2026.
And I think that's sort of the important point, which is we don't wish ill on anyone. But it's the Trump supporters who are now finally starting to feel the pain. As you mentioned, like the healthcare, rural hospitals are closing. In some counties, in some states, there's nowhere to have a baby. There's no obstetricians left in some states, right? And we haven't even talked about birth control and abortion access and things like that. So the people who supported him are feeling the burn, as it were, which unfortunately sometimes is the way it has to be. Just to mention all the shenanigans going on around elections and the SAVE Act, having to have a passport and to be able to vote. I think only 50%, I think, is the stat. Something like that of Americans actually have a passport, and you are less likely to have a passport if you are in a red state. So, women, if they have gotten married and changed their name, your name has to match your birth certificate. So all of that, the whole tirade against mail-in voting, well, that's how elderly Republicans voted. So he's living out, his fantasies of power, but hurting the people who got him to the top, right? And we need to remember he always despised his followers. They were just the vehicle to get him to where he needed to be. So hopefully they remember what has happened when it comes to the midterms and things haven't gone too sideways in terms of elections. I saw today that someone in the White House is drafting an executive order to declare an emergency around elections. So we'll see.
Okay, Jaden, coming up.
I'm Jaden. I kind of just I see the states and I think about a lot of division. Like I see Republican, Democrat, and I see like the kind of hatred they have toward each other. Like, for example, Charlie Kirk's death and the results of that after, of people kind of going at each other, just like verbally fighting over social media and whatnot. And like my kind of thoughts is like a 19-year-old is like, I see this country and I'm like, where's the unity? Where's the people kind of standing together against big issues? And I see Trump with like the Epstein files and all of these like terrible crimes as their leader and as their representative. And it's like, what kind of hope do they have of regaining some sense of unity when it's just like right versus left or Republican versus Democrat? And so I was just wanting to see some of your thoughts on that.
Well, like I said before, there has to be hope somewhere. It's hard to find it, but I mean, I see hope in what's going on in Minnesota and the way that the Minnesotan people have come together, the way people in Chicago did. And so the experience of the people who went through ICE occupation before Minnesota, actually have been to Minnesota to train people. There are the doulas who came together. There are people outside the Whipple detention center 24/7. They are protesting, but they are also there because ICE will just kick people out of detention 24 hours a day. It doesn't matter that it's sub-zero. You will leave with no socks, no shoes, no coat. There are people who are out there to escort people to a warm car, get them a phone call to their family. That's what gives me hope, is that grassroots coming together of communities and being there for people and acknowledging like these people are putting their life, like now we know they're putting their lives on the line to do that. We need that to spread. We need to see that in red states. There are actually growing protests around the purchase of warehouses to be turned into concentration camps. And that's happening in red states now too, where people are protesting the purchase of like having their county buy a warehouse through the feds. People are protesting that. It's the grassroots that I applaud that. And that's where we find hope. Let's see how many people turn out for No Kings on March 28th, because I think it was 5 million the last time. Let's hope it doubles, right?
And I think this goes to what Nathan, your kind of original question to me is that like the type of action that we're seeing right now in the United States is very much interconnected in a way that even in his first term was not, where you would have like Women's March, but with no actual thing they were asking for, just like a discontent march. But now, as Dr. Zuschlag has said, it's like an interconnected, like constellation of movements where when one crisis comes up, they move towards that crisis in unison. So there is solidarity to look at. So there is hope. And there are these huge issues that are, as you said, it's not a right or left issue. When you see, people being murdered in the streets, or children being put into detention, or looking away from ICE, the Epstein files. I saw a poll that said 76% of Americans want all things in the Epstein files released, regardless of party. I'm still like, who are these other 24% people that are like, yeah, we like pedophiles, but still, I mean, that's still a high percent, and that's across party lines as well. So I think that now we have these huge issues that, like I said, it's almost like a web, and when one thing happens, the solidarity moves towards that thing altogether, and then that's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't. This is the broader issue of a affective polarization. If somebody has an answer of how to come back from that, that would be a first. I am going to take my liberties here with the mic because Dr. McKercher mentioned FAFO, and that acronym has me thinking about TACO, and so I've got to ask a finance question here. So over the past year, and this is kind of hitting some of the same things we've been talking about, President Trump has repeatedly threatened the Federal Reserve chair, and he's brought up charges. And he's talked openly about changing the leadership, yet financial markets have remained relatively subdued all through this. So how should we understand this market reaction in the context of central bank independence? And getting to the acronym, this is we've heard of this TACO effect, which is Trump always chickens out, and so he makes threats, but the expectation that Trump ultimately pulls back from those most aggressive threats, is this meaningfully shaping investor behavior? This is a relatively narrow question.
Yes. So like if you see all this thing from the behavioral finance point of view, when we see uncertainty or anything new event, people like to learn. So they got worried first time, but when it happened again, investors are learning this thing. So now, after a couple of time, they learn this thing, what is political noise and what is policy signal. They can differentiate this thing, what is political drama. So not only that, on top of that, as Trump is threatening Fed's chairman, people have a lot of trust on Fed's independence. They know that it is not easy to take out the Fed chair so easily. There are strong guardrails. So whatever is happening, it is just a drama, and they can distinguish that thing. Now, coming to the TACO effect, yes, same thing happened. First time when Donald Trump threatened somebody, so they got worried, but then as they see this is happening in the negotiation environment, he's going to threaten somebody, then again chicken out, and it is happening. And same thing with the Fed also. He openly threatened to remove the Fed chair, but when he's doing this thing, people know that this is all political drama. He's not doing anything like anything policy action to remove it, and that's why markets remain calm no matter what President Trump is saying.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Joseph Corey, in English. We've heard a lot of talk about hope, and well, not a lot, but more than I expected. Let's put it that way. So let me phrase the question a little bit differently, and this sort of flows from Doug's question as well. The Supreme Court gave him near full immunity. He appointed most of the judges in the various circuit courts, the worst being Eileen Cannon in Florida, who's now trying to get him off on other things. Many of the states have given him pretty much a pass. The media, including CBS being the most prominent lately, has given him a pass. So most traditional media has just pretty well said, fuck him, whatever. He can do whatever he wants. And I already have tenure, so it's good. Well, So basically, what surprises me is that at least half Americans are either racist or naive or dumb, because in a country of 350 million people, they knew that the orange ape is a rapist. They knew that already. They knew that he was a criminal. They knew that he's a grifter. They knew that he is a liar, and yet they still voted for him twice now, right? So I don't see any hope, because I think you're right, Dr. Zuschlag, that in fact, he's pretty much tarnished the country to the point it'll probably take, I'm going to guess, a minimum of 3 generations if they are going to fix it. But the reality is that there seems to be, 350 million people, there should have been 20 million people at Denokin's rally. There should have been at least 20 million. If you look at 12%, that's the minimum usually what you want to accomplish anything. They're nowhere near that. And so I wonder about this, because, what I see, I actually think, for example, that if Rene Good was killed, nothing was happening until Preddy was killed, which is interesting. I'll leave it at interesting, right? But the fact is, that tells us a lot about how Americans think. They didn't care that Rene Good was killed. I mean, she was murdered, and they didn't really care. But Preddy, and if it weren't for the camera catching the guy pulling the gun, running away from him, they wouldn't have done a damn thing. So I'm just not optimistic. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit too cynical, but I think shithole country is beyond redemption now.
Well, the cruelty has always been the point, as I mentioned. So it's the idea that he didn't like the people that I didn't like, and he made it okay to be vocal. What someone said recently, that it's not that Trump is the United States, there's where Trump is who the Americans are. He's no longer a symptom. He was the disease all along. And giving permission to their basest elements and things like that. And as long as he was hurting the people that they didn't like, and he didn't impact their lives, then it was fine. My concern is that in the midterms, because what usually happens is we would have these spikes of, we don't like Trump right now because he's done something that has impacted our life. They turned around and voted him right back in. So it was like everything had been forgotten. It didn't matter. Your litany, your list didn't matter when it came to that. And that is my concern. That is my fear. Because we, 3 of us, sorry, Vijay, you weren't around, but we all in October 24 were like, hopefully not. Like, he's a bad guy. It doesn't make sense. Why would they do this? And then they did it anyways. So yeah. And they had to bring these two, who someone said the division. Jaden, you mentioned, like, how do we bring people together to start basically what is starting over? I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure. And as much as I say hope, maybe I just needed to put that in as a little hook, because everything around that was despair and cynicism. So
I'm going to take a more positive view of John and Jane America, Joseph, and the 40% or something that 50% that voted for him in the last election. Sure, I'm sure some of those people are dumb and racist, etc. But I'm sure many of them are, well-meaning Americans who live in an atomized media environment. Young people in the room. Did you know that in 2016, Donald Trump, there was a leak of a video in which Donald Trump was on a bus talking to a guy named Billy Bush, in which he said he liked to grab women by the vagina, and if you're a celebrity, you let them do it. That was like front page, wall-to-wall news in 2016 at the very end of the election campaign. I bet many Americans, particularly younger Americans, didn't even know that happened in 2020 or 2024. That was 8 years ago, and if you're a young person, you didn't see it on TikTok. No offense to young people on TikTok, right? There's completely atomized environments where if you watch Fox News or you don't, frankly, watch any news at all or consume newspapers, you don't get any of this information. And if your only impression of Donald Trump is, he ran 15 seasons as a very successful businessman playing one, at least on television, well, that's your perception of him, right? So what people consume, you're going to rant about liberalism or something, but what people consume in terms of their media diet obviously affects what they know about things. And so if you don't read the newspaper, as most Americans don't, if you don't really watch the evening news, we're talking about CBS, how important it is to have CBS. I think 1.2 million Americans watch CBS a day. That's 0.3% of the American population. That's not a lot of people, actually. How many Americans consume news? Probably actually not that many, but they watch things on their phone. And if it's not really on their phone, they don't really care. And so Donald Trump is not a polished politician, and that's part of his appeal too, right? He speaks like a normal person off the cuff. He's like your uncle, and he might say some naughty things here and there, but he's not a polished politician like a Gavin Newsom or, frankly, a Joseph or Biden or a Kamala Harris or something like that. And so that authenticity obviously appealed to Americans too, and he offered Americans hope in the 2016 election, and the 2020 election, and the 2044 election. And he offered them a kind of a hope to go after their enemies, their cultural enemies and their racial enemies, etc. But he also offered them the hope to reshore jobs and go after Johnny Foreigner, great kinds of things that you could do. And did he fulfill all those promises? No. But he said he would, and he's a businessman, and we don't really know about the scandals. I imagine if you asked a lot of people, they probably wouldn't even know he's in the Epstein files. They maybe haven't seen the photos of him dancing with Epstein, depending on the media diet they consume or don't consume at all. Right? We live in such an atomized media environment, to go back to the gentleman who asked the question about polarization, right? In Americans, depending on what you're consuming, what your algorithm feeds you, or the kinds of news sources you do, you have a completely different view of the world than you do if you're consuming other media. There's no easy answers to that, but that means that many Americans will just trust in him, right? And now they're finding out, oh shit, we have to pay the piper. We're getting Donald Trump's policies straight and true. And he's not just saying he's going to round up the criminals. He's rounding up everybody, right, who's brown. Little abuelas and hardworking people at Home Depots.
I wasn't indicating one more question. I was like, I would like to say something now, please.
I think we have time for one more question. I do.
We have time for a couple more questions. I just wanted to kind of jump on what Dr. McKercher was saying and put in a little plug for what I have been, the drum that I have been banging for a long time, is that the Republicans have had a long-term project to dismantle the public education system in the United States, so that an atomized media environment is perfect breeding ground for racism, all the isms and the obias, because they have systematically broken down the education system in the United States going back to the 70s under Nixon. Right now, the Department of Education itself is being dismantled, sold for parts. So when you make the Secretary of Education the former head of the World Wrestling Federation, that tells me how much you care about having educated citizens. And an authoritarian loves ignorance, because in their eyes, ignorance is strength. And that means power for them. They can control the historical narrative. They can change what truth is. And then you get citizens who will vote again in 2028 for, who knows, maybe it's Trump again. But that's what it is. That's all of this feeds back into, in my mind, the systematic destruction of the public education system.
Can I say one sentence just to finish off?
You may.
We haven't talked about ancient Greece yet, so I have to come in. I just wanted to add a quote to what you had said about education, and this is from Plato's Gorgias, which is a book where he warns us about political rhetoric, and he says that a non-expert in front of a group of non-experts who says he is an expert is an expert. And so I think that that's a fitting quote to add to your topic.
Thank you. I think you are an expert in ancient Greece. That is true. Yes. Yes, please.
My name is Brody, and this is probably going to be more directed at Dr. Murphy, because I wanted to ask about the very recent development of the Kansas trans people's IDs being canceled. and how that kind of connects to the bigger picture regarding the Constitution and the government's power and ability to be able to remove valid identification from their citizens.
All right, thank you. Good question. I mean, removing valid identification from citizens is always a very terrifying thing. It's historically been used for genocides in the past. It's absolutely evident that the Trump administration and more broadly Republicans in state governments are interested in making queer persons invisible, making queer history invisible, making it look like it was never powerful, taking pride flag off of, I almost said Stonehenge again.
Uh-oh.
I said Stonehenge last time, Stonewall. And so I think trying to remove IDs again is just like another form of trying to create invisibility, to say these people do not exist. They cannot legally exist. And when you say a person cannot legally exist, then you can legally do anything to them. And that's really terrifying.
We will do one more.
Oh, thank you. Sure. My name is Kate Graves, and my question is, how badly have they dismantled anything to do with the climate and the environment? And we didn't go there, but I think a lot of what's happening is so they can hide behind the Epstein files and, not talk about what is really critical at this point in time.
They have absolutely dismantled all of any sort of climate science organization. They withdrew from the Paris, like the climate accords. It's drill baby drill, all the way. And the EPA has been destroyed. I think they just rolled back car emissions. So there are now no checks or balances on any car manufacturing, all of that sort of stuff. And it'll have to be cobbled together by states. Like California has stepped up. The states that had been making progress are continuing on by themselves. Right. And we can talk about the World Health Organization, and we haven't even talked about RFK Jr. and vaccines and medical research and things like that. No, I know. And I'm just saying, like, this is all connected. Right. Because if we don't have climate protections, no one's checking on pollution. We don't know who's getting sick or why, because we'll have heavy metals in the water again. Right. So it's all connected, and it's all about the grift and who can pay into the Bitcoin bucket and basically have carte blanche to do whatever they want in the United States.
When Donald Trump built a golf course in Scotland, the nearby community at the same time was building a wind farm. And so they built the wind farm, and it blocked some of the beautiful views from his golf course. And so ever since, Donald Trump has hated wind farms. And so he's told people they cause cancer and they kill whales and the poor birds that are killed by windmills, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, in his second administration, Donald Trump has now canceled any U.S. government contracts for wind farms. And he's forced basically private companies, if they want to have a contract with the U.S. government, they have to divest themselves of investments in wind farms. Again, if I'm a believer in free markets, this is government, like state intervention that Xi Jinping couldn't himself dream up. But the point of this is, because of the whims of one single person, the U.S. government has divested itself of any investments in wind farms, going to the point where even state governments in the United States are shutting down wind farms that have even been built because, of course, state governments want to contract with the federal government. It's so because of the whims of a single person on one single issue, whether you care about climate change or not, whatever, but just the government intervening on the whims of a single person in an issue is just the Trump administration magnified. Because people in Scotland once built some windmills near his golf course. I mean, what a fucking way, pardon me, to run a government. Pardon me, pardon my French. Sorry, I know there's nuns in the room too. I'm very sorry. I'm Protestant. Sorry. But still, I feel guilty. I feel guilty, sisters. Sorry.
On that note, I want to thank our moderator and panelists this evening for giving us multiple insights into what's going on south of the border. I want to do a particular thanks to Dr. Joseph Corey, who stepped in to provide his photographic skills to take pictures this evening. So as a token of our thanks, thank you so much, Dr. Corey. There's a few events, as I always have, tell you to take out your calendars at the end of one event. We have multiple events coming up. For our students on March the 6th from 1 to 3, Dr. Will Sweet will be presenting a workshop on Robert's Rules. For those of you that don't know, Robert's Rules are the foundations of parliamentary protocols, when you go and do meetings in business. They're kind of important for everything. I was talking to some parliamentarians, and when I said we were running this workshop, they were like excited. They couldn't believe that we would do that because it's not something you would normally get. So if you're interested, please send an email to sign up. It's a great line you can put on your resume. Attended a workshop with the eminent Dr. Will Sweet, and it'll just add a little bit more to what you can offer. On March the 9th, we will have the Honorable Lisa Raitt joining us. She will be doing 2 events. She will be talking at a Lunch and Learn, which will focus on some of her career. So it's an informal opportunity to ask questions around what it's like to be on the floor in Parliament.
Former cabinet minister in the Harper government. Just
yes, she was a
students might not
deputy
know who she is because they weren't maybe alive when she was.
That's.
Oh, no,
I know I'm old. I assume everybody knows the same sort of thing I do. So Lisa Raitt, she's also our current chair of the board here on campus. So she then will be speaking that evening on the fabulous work she has been doing on Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving advocacy. So that'll be happening on March the 9th at 7 o'clock.
In this room.
March the 11th, we have next talk in our Sober Second Thinker series, where we'll have Senator Roger Kusner, who will be coming to talk about how his experiences as both an MP and a senator compare when dealing with various government issues. So that's 7 o'clock on the 11th.
In this room.
In this room. I think on the 16th.
Oh yes, we have Dr. Stan for a yet to be titled talk at 4 o'clock in 3022. Not this room. About how should we describe it? Secret files in the Epstein files. So that's a little titillating there for you.
And the last one, which connects a bit to some of the cursing we heard this evening, the curse of politics, which is a major political podcast that happens in Canada. We're so fortunate. This is a soft launch. You're one of the first to hear this. We'll be live recording here on campus.
Not in this room.
Not in this room.
Be in McKenna.
So March the 30th at 7:30.
And they'll swear more than I will.
What's that?
So.
Yes.
I knew the one I read. Yeah. Fred Delory, our alumnus Fred Delory, will be on, and now I can't remember anyone else's names, but it's their
Scott.
usual.
Yes.
Their usual suspects are coming.
Like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Fred is the guest. He's not usually on it, but yeah.
Yes, he's replacing Corey. Yes.
Yeah.
So as you can see, we still have a full slate as we're coming towards the end of term. Please keep your eyes out on social media channels for all the information, emails, and the like. We are coming to the end of our time. I have 1 minute left. I don't really have anything to fill it other than to say thank you again for coming. Really appreciate you. coming out. Thank you to our panelists and moderator. Safe travels.